Good morning, philosophers. Hope you're well today. Let's continue. Chapter 6, and we're still I'm going to continue doing the 10,000 foot view of the chapters instead of the diving into the stories. Procrastination, the easy road to a stressful life. Quote by Oscar Wilde begins with, "I never put off until tomorrow what I can possibly put off until the day after tomorrow." Betty was a delicate feature. Oh, let's see. We're going to skip the narrative. Procrastination isn't all bad. Unreasonable procrastination is one of the most widespread and crippling of personal problems. But very few people come to see me because they're concerned about their procrastination. When people suffer from an emotional condition, such as anxiety or depression, they may not think of seeing a psychotherapist. But when people suffer from a behavioral problem, such as drinking or overeating, they rarely consider a psychotherapist. They may think of Alcoholics Anonymous or Weight Watchers or some other self-help group. There is, however, no Procrastinators Anonymous, although unreasonable procrastination is even more widespread than overdrinking or overeating, and often helps to cause these other problems. Betty's case was very typical in that she felt impelled to see a therapist because of an emotional state, depression. But it then emerged that she was bothering herself about failing to complete tasks she believed she ought to perform, and was lashing herself cruelly because of her behavioral disorder, unreasonable procrastination. Procrastination comes from two Latin words meaning for tomorrow. Procrastination simply means deferring until a later date. It is not necessarily self-defeating. To procrastinate, to delay some action, can often be a reasonable thing to do. In isolation, an individual decision to procrastinate may be hard to classify as reasonable or unreasonable. If Richard puts off a visit to the dentist, pleading pressure of work, this may be rational, but if Richard has been using the same excuse for the past 5 years so that he now faces the prospect of costly gum surgery, which he could have avoided by keeping his dental appointments, we may suspect that Richard's procrastination is unreasonable. Even the most unreasonable procrastinators can often find a plausible-sounding reason for procrastinating on each occasion. If you are in doubt about whether your decision to defer some action is reasonable or unreasonable, a good test is the no future regrets method. Ask yourself how you will feel about your current decision when you look back on it a day or two later. When tomorrow comes, will you think today's decision was wise, or will you regret it? In most cases, it's only necessary to pose this question clearly to know the answer immediately. Then you act accordingly. You behave now in the way that you think you will look back on with most satisfaction at a later date. Colin's procrastination problem. Okay, we're not going to go into another one of those. 3-minute exercise. No pain, no gain. Nothing of great value is ever achieved simply by doing what comes most easily. You will be effective in pursuing any important long-term goal, whether it's writing a novel or preserving your marriage, only if you work at it when you don't feel like working at it. In his martial arts, Colin was familiar with periods when he seemed to be making slow progress and when the practice seemed less enjoyable than usual. He already understood in his purely physical pursuits that it was most satisfying to stick to the long-term project, ignoring his day-to-day fluctuations in interest and enjoyment. It proved helpful for Colin to extend this understanding to his progress in accounting. After a hard struggle with some relapses, he convinced himself that he could indeed tolerate the discomfort of doing what he didn't feel like doing. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Paul's problem solved. Musts, shoulds, 3-minute exercises. Okay, 3-minute judo. Make inertia work for you. Like most emotional problems, unreasonable procrastination is best tackled by identifying your musts and disputing them, but there are also special techniques that have been found to be effective. A person who unreasonably procrastinates is usually aware that she is acting against her better judgment. There are useful stratagems to shift the balance in favor of the more rationally preferred course of action. It may take a little experimentation to find the techniques that work best for you. If your problem is just one or a few important tasks that you keep putting off, try setting specific times each day or each week to devote to these tasks. Suppose, for example, that you've enrolled in a course in Italian and plan to possess a fair familiarity with spoken and written Italian by next year. When you visit your uncle Giordano in Milan, put exact times in your calendar to study for the course. Refuse invitations that clash with those times, and in general treat these appointments as you would the most serious appointments in your life. The time you allocate to these sessions with the Italian course can be surprisingly brief and can still be effective. Suppose that you study for the course for 15 minutes at a fixed time each day. No one has decreed that you have to stop when the 15 minutes are up. You can then elect to keep going for another 3 minutes or even another 15 minutes. Who knows? You may occasionally become engrossed and keep going for a couple of hours. This illustrates the basic rationale of most anti-procrastination techniques. Make inertia work for you. We all, in varying degrees, have a tendency to inertia. We all find it easier to continue what we're doing than to change gears and start doing something different. But once we have started doing that different thing, inertia begins to work in favor of sticking to it. The rationale is similar to that of judo, jiu-jitsu, where the fighter learns ways to use his opponent's own weight to the opponent's disadvantage. This principle can be taken to its ultimate in the 3-minute procrastination buster. In this technique, you simply decide that you will spend 3 minutes working on something. Even though 3 minutes seems not worth doing, suppose that you've been putting off an unpleasant chore for some time. Then you decide to give it 3 minutes. But as some of my clients have protested, I can't accomplish anything worthwhile in 3 minutes. What's the point? The point is to get started, and thereby get the force of inertia on your side, even if it takes you 4 minutes to assemble the relevant file folders so that you don't feel you can even begin the real job until you've spent 4 minutes preparing for it. Just spend the 3 minutes all the same. But act the part convincingly. Do everything just as if you were going to work at it for, let's say, the 6 hours you estimate the whole job will take. But what's the point of my spending only 3 minutes when I can't really begin until I'm 4 minutes into it? Isn't that irrational and purposeless behavior? No, in the first place. No one said you're rigidly locked into spending only 3 minutes. You just might choose to spend the 4th minute or a 5th. You don't have to, but you just might. Secondly, that first 3 minutes of the 4 minutes preparation is really beginning the job. If it sets up the job, it's part of the job. Thirdly, the appeal of the 3 minutes is that it's so little time that you may find it hard to begrudge. After all, you wouldn't begrudge spending 3 minutes helping a blind man you don't even know get safely across the street, so why would you begrudge 3 minutes to help yourself, temporarily blinded by unreasonable procrastination, across the street to where you really want to go? Fourthly, the more you resist making yourself start on the distasteful task, the more you may intimidate yourself by thinking of the size of the entire task. In order to break that pattern of thinking, you chop that mammoth task into bite-sized pieces. You convince yourself in practice of the truth of the ancient Chinese proverb, every journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Getting organized. Some people are conspicuously organized. They meet deadlines while appearing unruffled. They cope with many difficult tasks. Their desks or file cabinets look tidy. Other people are equally conspicuously poorly organized. What's the connection between poor organization and unreasonable procrastination? It is not simple. Well-organized people sometimes do practice unreasonable procrastination. Unreasonable procrastination afflicts the overwhelming majority of people in varying degrees. I have had as clients some dynamic sharpshooters who, it has turned out, were bothered by their unreasonable procrastination. In some cases, organizational skills are a matter of luck. A person just happened to learn useful skills from someone they worked with, for example. Norma was an administrator who had a lot of correspondence about many different matters to keep track of. For various reasons, a simple alphabetical or chronological system for all documents was not appropriate in this job. Norma was usually behind with filing and frequently could not find a document within a reasonable time period. Moving on. Another story. Give yourself rewards and penalties. At the end of this... Okay, never mind. Moving on. This is more story. Okay, end of that chapter. Aha! Chapter 7. Depression, to Hell and Back. John Milton said, "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of a hell of a heaven. Heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." If you saw someone repeatedly hitting himself with a hammer, you would probably assume that for some mysterious reason he wanted to hurt himself. If this person complained bitterly that he was covered with painful bruises and would do anything to escape from the torment, you might point out to him that he could accomplish this very easily. All he has to do is stop hitting himself. Now, suppose that this person takes your advice and stops hitting himself with the hammer. And 2 minutes later he says, "Well, I still feel lousy. My bruises are still giving me hell. That didn't seem to work. And I really have a strong urge to start hitting myself again, so that's what I'll do." If you believed that this person was in earnest, you would explain to him that it takes time for the bruises to go away. But you might also explain that he doesn't really need to keep hitting himself. He doesn't gain anything by it, so he might as well stop, even though this apparently requires an effort. In reality, we do not often observe such ridiculous behavior. If you hit yourself with a hammer, it hurts physically. The pain is so sharp and immediate that you can hardly fail to notice the connection between the hammer blows and the pain. You would therefore be unlikely to get into the habit of hitting yourself with a hammer without noticing that you were doing so. It's not so obvious to people that when they're depressed, it's directly caused by their musty thinking. If you tell yourself you're a worthless clod, there is no piercing, obvious warning that impels you to stop thinking like that. So you may get into the habit of telling yourself this sort of thing. You may even develop this habit without noticing it. Then one day you may start to experience the equivalent of bruises and broken bones. You become aware that you are suffering from depression, and you may refuse to believe that you have brought the depression upon yourself by your musty thinking. Bruce had the appearance, to be or not to be depressed. Okay, we're going into another story, moving on. If you guys want to read this book in depth, the link is in the description. Myths about depression and relationships. A common misconception is that depression always means lethargy, so that people who are energetic and active cannot be depressed. But this is to confuse one possible consequence of depression with depression itself. Some depressed people are very hardworking and conscientious, and some, like Bruce, have had lots of relationships. Another misconception fostered by the old post-Freudian style of psychotherapy is that people who repeatedly have failed relationships unconsciously seek out those partners who will be bad for them. But there is a simpler explanation that seems to fit the facts better. We are not suited for long-term relationships with many of the individuals we date. Most people recognize this and terminate unpromising relationships at an early stage, many almost before they have begun. By contrast, people with many failed relationships like Bruce are inclined to persist with unpromising relationships because of unrealistic, musty thinking. They may, for example, think, "I must avoid discomfort, therefore I couldn't face the prospect of telling my partner it's over," or, "If the relationship isn't perfect, the way it should be, it's my fault, so I will never find anyone who'd be any better." Other people bring to their relationships such unrealistic assumptions that they are bound to be disappointed. They may think, "A good relationship will be continually easy, pleasurable, and hassle-free. If my present relationship isn't like that, then it's unworkable." All right. I'll continue from there tomorrow. Halfway through this book at this accelerated pace. I liked that one thing it said in the procrastination chapter. Let me see if I can go back and find it real quick. Not the 3 minute. I mean, yeah, the 3 minute thing is very close to the 15s that I do. If you've watched my bullet journal, the recent updated bullet journal video, I talked about 15s briefly, but it's basically that same thing. Getting started has a lot of power, even if you don't work on it for a long time. You can take down giant tasks by just doing small amounts of time each day. It was. Well, this was good. Nothing of great value is ever achieved by doing what comes most easily. That's very true. But that wasn't the thing. What was the thing? Let's see. Procrastination isn't all bad. Yes. Yep. Got it. Oh, that's what it was. Okay. I found it. When tomorrow comes, will you think today's decision was wise, or will you regret it? Today's decision to procrastinate or to not do something. Will you look back on it and think that decision was wise tomorrow? Because I think that's really effective advice for me. Let me highlight that. Because a lot of the stuff that I procrastinate on is just like things that are uncomfortable to think about, or things that are, I don't know, uncomfortable tasks to complete. Things that make me angry or frustrated, generally dealing with the state or the government. Judges, let's say. The non-consensual stuff. And so I tend to procrastinate on those, which usually ends up in the situation being worse. And I find, so what happens is if I took, like, there's something on my table right now. If I took care of it, which I'm determined to today, but yesterday I looked at that pile of stuff to do on my desk that involved some of this state-related stuff that just either makes me angry or, oh, I said makes me angry. Michael Edelstein would be upset at me. Wow. That's interesting to think about. Anyway, so there's this task that I don't enjoy doing. And if I'd have done it yesterday, I wouldn't have thought about it today. And I wouldn't having to be feeling and thinking and dealing with it today. And so if I think today, man, do I wish I'd taken care of it yesterday? Yeah. Okay. So now let's apply that forward, using our brain cells. If I don't do it today, tomorrow, it's still going to be sitting on the table, and I'm going to have wished I had done it today. So I like that. I think that's a really good anti-procrastination tool. I'm going to think about that today. All right, guys. Have a great day.